Our next guest has been shining a light on a really undercovered part of Israel's assault on the Gaza Strip. Antony Loewenstein is an independent journalist and author of The Palestine Laboratory, who was based in East Jerusalem between 2016 and 2020, and he joins us now. Great to see you, Antony. Welcome.
Good to see you, man.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about the book and how it relates to what we're seeing right now.
The book essentially is a multi-year investigation looking at how Israel's occupation of Palestine is the longest in modern times. And over those decades, more than half a century, Israel has developed huge amounts of tools and technologies to maintain that occupation. So in the modern age, we're talking about drones, spyware, biometric tools, all these different methods that Israel uses to control Palestinians 24/7. That's bad enough. But what Israel's been doing for decades, pretty much since the 1950s, so very soon after Israel's birth, is promoting and selling and marketing those tools and technologies as so-called battle-tested in Palestine on Palestinians to the world.
Wow.
And essentially what that means practically is that I calculated at least 140 countries, so the majority of countries on the planet, have bought some form of this technology in the last decades. How that relates to what's happening now since October 7 is really clear, is that Israel has been live testing, both the government and private companies, live testing new weapons in Gaza. And that's not just for a domestic Israeli audience, who obviously are mostly supporting the war, but for a global market that in months and years to come are likely want to buy those tools and technologies in their own wars.
Yeah, Anthony, I remember that Israeli drones made a big appearance in Azerbaijan. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because I know that those drones were kind of the forefront of the technology, and they'd made a couple of appearances in being sold into that. And they actually made quite a bit of a difference, if you could tell us about that.
Yeah, well, those drones were suicide drones mostly, and Israel is a really key provider and developer of those tools. Now, that's obviously a conflict that, as you say, hasn't got a lot of international attention, but should, because Israel's pretty much on arguably the wrong side there, the very repressive side. And one of the things I think that shows in that Azerbaijan conflict is that, and this is not on one level massively different to, say, the US. The US is the world's biggest arms dealer, sells about 45% of the world's weapons. Israel's 10th. And there's not really any moral qualms to sell to anybody, literally anybody. I mean, at the moment, as far as where Israel does not sell to Syria, South Korea, or Iran, but the majority of other nations in the world, they will. And the reason so many other nations want these tools is because they're tested in Palestine on Palestinians, like literally to the point. I show this in the book, and it's appeared in other shows that I've talked about on film, is that Israel routinely will document these testing in Palestine, and they show those videos to clients. So in the last year, some of the most notorious examples, obviously, is Pegasus, the phone hacking tool that has been appearing in countless countries, from India to Bangladesh to others. And those tools were originally tested in Palestine. And in fact, they're still being used in Palestine and other countries around the world. So the Azerbaijan conflict was one, and there are so many others that I think don't get enough attention, but they should.
Haaretz took a look at a related topic here. Let's put this up on the screen. The headline here is Shark Tanks. With Gaza as testing ground, Israeli defense startups flourish. Suicide drones and AI systems, strict regulations, and the dominance of the major defense firms mean few small defense startups are founded in Israel each year. They are looking at new opportunities amid geopolitical tensions, rising military budgets, and the Gaza war. Can you just talk to us about how the profit motive incentivizes war and conflict?
Well, it's key, isn't it? Because the global arms trade is now over $2 trillion annually, not just Israel, but globally. And of course, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February a couple of years ago, huge amounts of European nations were begging the US and Israel for new missile defense shields and other kind of equipment, which they claim would protect them against potential attack by Russia if that ever happened. What Israel, I think, is doing, and that article you quote is interesting, which also mirrors what I'm hearing from my sources, is that a lot of American Silicon Valley venture capital companies and others are looking to Israel since October 7. It started before then, of course, but particularly since October 7. And they see opportunity. They see huge amounts of possibilities of not just weapons, but also economic opportunities, investing. And a lot of those companies are live testing the weapons in Gaza to the point where they're often putting that on social media live, which is then promoted and sold to other nations across the globe. So the arms industry is booming. And it's interesting, the latest figures we have from Israel is 2022. It was 12.5 billion US, which is the biggest by far. 24% of that were Arab autocracies, the so-called Abraham Accords that Trump began and Biden has continued. And so these are nations like Saudi and UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and others. They're buying all this surveillance equipment because they're petrified of the next Arab Spring, basically. And Israel is the key provider of that. So that's, I think, a context that people often don't remember, that Israel, to me, and I say this to someone who's Jewish myself, is that Israel in some ways is exporting the occupation globally. What's happening in Palestine is not staying there.
Yeah, Anthony, give us some more examples of some of the things that you've seen just from your sources and others in this current war. Traditionally, they've relied, currently on nothing particularly new, at least for now. We've seen like 2,000-pound bombs. We've seen some infantry, but we've also, as you said, we've had suicide drones, and those have also proliferated, been copied. The Houthis have been using them in some cases. So what is the current conflict? What are some of the technologies and others that you see that we're going to be seeing in other conflicts sometime soon?
Some of it's surveillance tech. So after October 7, when Hamas took in large numbers of hostages, around 240, there was a lot of those surveillance Israeli companies that were used by the government to try to find those people in Gaza. Now, arguably not very successfully. Of course, there are still now around 130, 140 stuck in Gaza. And the intelligence that's actually being provided to Israel to find that out is not just coming from Israel, it's actually also coming from other sources, the US particularly, and in fact also Australia. So one of the advances that Israel is testing, yes, surveillance equipment, also particularly sophisticated surveillance drones, suicide drones, and also I think the idea of not just sort of night goggles, but very sophisticated kind of night goggles, because what Israel is facing in Gaza is a deeply problematic enemy from their perspective, where Israel is gone into Gaza, all guns blazing, and they're actually having a problem because 4 months in, Hamas is still standing, bloodied to be sure, but is still standing and arguably is never going to be fully defeated. So I think we're talking about surveillance tech, drones, and various other forms like that, which, as I said, are being tested in real time, which we'll see in other conflicts around the world in the coming months and years.
To that point, has there been any loss of confidence in this high tech? Because one of the things that we saw on October 7th is the first thing that Hamas did is they took these very low-tech, basically like off-the-shelf drones and disabled a lot of this incredibly expensive high-tech equipment that the Israelis had. They took a bulldozer and took down the, multi-million-dollar border wall. And as you pointed out, for all of the high-tech surveillance equipment that the Israelis have, they clearly haven't been able to locate or certainly effectively extract their own hostages to the point that they actually killed 3 of their own hostages because they thought that they were Palestinians. So has there been any reassessment or even any sort of leveling of the playing field in this era of guerrilla warfare between the incredible high tech that the U.S. and Israel and a lot of other modern countries rely on and what these sort of, ragtag guerrilla army type insurgencies are able to cobble together?
Amongst the Israeli public, the answer is undeniably yes. I mean, the Israeli public, and I'm generalizing here, of course, there are always exceptions, have spent years and years and years with the deluded belief, frankly, that you can occupy people indefinitely in the West Bank and Gaza and get so-called security. Now, obviously, October 7 shattered that. So many of Israeli Jews in Israel do not feel safe anymore. If you ask me about how the Israeli defense sector and military feel, their response has been hubris. So on the one hand, they are trying to make up for what they clearly failed miserably on October 7. And that's this overwhelming force, massive amounts of war crimes and completely insane amounts of violence against not just Gazans in people themselves, but also infrastructure and Gaza's way of life. But I think what I'm seeing actually is hubris in the Israeli defense sector. They very much see it akin to 9/11 in the US. And 9/11 was obviously a massive intelligence failure in America, but that in fact bolstered America's defense sector massively. Wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and etc. You're going to see a very similar situation in Israel where, yes, October 7 was a catastrophic failure, clearly, but there's no indication that I've seen thus far at all that those defence companies, which failed miserably, are holding themselves account, or they're actually being held account by the Israeli government yet at all.
Yeah, they're actually
really
making more money probably than ever.
Yeah.
Anthony, thank you so much. It was fantastic to talk to you, and really recommend that people check out the book. It's incredibly revelatory.
Yeah, we'll have a link down in the description. Thank you very much, Anthony.
Thanks
Great
so
talking
much,
to you.
guys.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.